Hello and welcome to this detailed tutorial video for the Operation and Maintenance Program Development Tool. My name is Ben O'Donnell and I worked on the development of this tool with the team at Washington State Department of Commerce. This is the second video in a two-part series. Please watch the first video if you want to first get a higher level overview of the O&M Program Development Tool. This video is going to be a detailed tutorial on how to set it up and use it. So if you are here watching this video, maybe you work with managing or implementing operation and maintenance programs. Perhaps you're an equipment maintainer or a facility manager or an operations personnel, or maybe you're like me and you're an energy manager. In any case, we will be covering how to set up and interact with the O&M Program Development Tool using some detailed examples in this video. By the end of this video, you will understand how to create an O&M plan using the O&M Program Development Tool. You will know how to add equipment, schedule preventive maintenance tasks, and log inspection and maintenance activities. You will be able to create custom O&M tasks with the O&M Program Development Tool. And lastly, you will be able to review your data and create custom summary reports. So now I'm going to switch over to viewing Microsoft Excel, starting with the blank O&M Program Development Tool. And before we get started, and as I open this file, let me start by saying that this spreadsheet was created using Excel, and you will need to make sure that you are using a version of MS Excel from 2016 or later, which has been receiving updates from Microsoft. Or you can use Excel 2019 or subsequent versions, or alternatively, this will work with all editions of Microsoft 365. The spreadsheet is an XLSX file and does not use any macros, so you do not need to worry about the Developer tab. This also means that a relative newcomer to Microsoft Excel can fully utilize the O&M Program Development Tool without any special training beyond this video. And I do encourage you to watch this presentation in full screen mode so that all text on the screen is legible. Full screen mode should be accessible in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. And as you can see here, the first thing that we see when we open this file is this Instructions tab. And all along the bottom here, you can see these orange tabs, which are all the tabs that you will interact with when you use the O&M Program Development Tool. I encourage all users that are planning on editing the O&M Program Development Tool to read these instructions and refer back to them in the future, as the instructions provide guidance on the intended way to fill out the spreadsheet. I will be touching on all of these instructions during the course of this video, but I will not be reading down the list. So this is set up for you to go to each one of these orange tabs along the bottom and fill them out from left to right, starting with this Building Information tab. And before we proceed, let me just scroll down on the instructions and show you the rest of the instructions on this tab. Please feel free to read these. Next, Building Information. So here we are on the Building Info tab. On this tab, you will need to enter your building information and ownership and management contact information. This is pretty straightforward, and I'm going to be filling this out with examples, so please watch the formatting as I do this. So we can see here that the red cell means that it's a required input. So when you enter something like I did here with John Doe, the formatting of these required cells updates to normal text like this. Let's just keep filling out all of the information as though this is a real building. And as we come down here, let me just, let me change this to Washington State Capitol Building. The short name, and you have to read the note here. The short name is used in the spreadsheet, so it's not something to be completely overlooked. This is supposed to be a shortened acronym version of your building, so that when you refer to it, it's clear to see that you are referring to this building. So for this example, Washington State Capitol Building, I'm going to abbreviate that to WSCB. That can be our short name for this example. Washington State Building ID number. This is going to typically be a numerical entry. I don't have a example of the format of this, but it's this is issued by the Washington State Department of Commerce. So just enter this here. And here we have this yellow box next. So before we've had all these red required boxes. So what does this yellow mean? The yellow means that it's an optional fill-in. So it is okay if you leave this blank. Let's see here. Now, the Washington State Building ID is a specific ID issued by the Department of Commerce for certain buildings, especially related to programs like the Clean Buildings Performance Standard. Now, you will find this ID in the initial notification letter and the Clean Buildings portal. And this UFI, or Unique Facility Identifier, is a unique code assigned to each state-owned or leased facility in Washington Facilities Inventory. Just as an example, we'll fill this in, and maybe we'll say, okay, the owner, Jane Doe. Ownership LLC, let's say that they're located at a different address. And I don't know Spokane's zip code. Let's just enter a random one. And you get the idea here. It's and below this, we do have manager, owner, representative. If it is different from the owner, this works the exact same way as the owner information. So now that we have some information filled out, I'm going to proceed to the contact information tab. All right, as we can see here on this first column, B1 organization on the contact information tab, this first column, organization, is required because it's red, and all of these other fields are yellow because they are optional inputs. Of course, it is recommended to fill all of this out and keep it updated as a best practice to ensure the success of your operation and maintenance program. But the only cells which affect other cells here is this first column, B1 organization. Now I'm going to go ahead and fill in some contacts here because we are going to be using them throughout the rest of this tutorial and to really just to illustrate how this works. So let's say this first organization is ABC Owner Incorporated, Facility Management Incorporated. Let's say that this next entity is not a company, but it's simply your in-house staff and you want to list them separately. Maybe this next one is a contractor, a landscaping contractor. Maybe we have a contractor as a maintainer. Let's say two of them are maintainers, Fixit Incorporated. And I'm just going to be showing you how this is intended to be filled out. So let's say the role is owner, facility manager, let's just say in-house staff. Let's say landscaping contractor. Let's say HVAC contractor. And let's say that this next one's also an HVAC contractor. Now the personnel name, let's just list a few dummy names. Say Oren owner. Felicity facility. Bob Boiler can be our in-house actor. Okay, this is our landscaper. That's one of our HVAC contractors, and there's our other one. Now, this is, just for example's sake, this covers everything that we'll use throughout this tutorial. Please note that below we have emergency contact information as well. Feel free to fill this in. A lot of this will be matching to some of the personnel names that you list above. I'm not going to show you how to fill this out. This is pretty self-explanatory. Okay, so let's move on next to the HVAC Inventory tab, the third orange tab here at the bottom. All right, here on the HVAC Inventory, the idea here is that you have to create equipment, and then later we will assign maintenance tasks to that equipment. So each one of these rows has to be one piece of equipment. You cannot have multiple equipment associated with the same row. So starting with this equipment facility ID, this is an identifier of a piece of equipment that the facility uses to refer to. So if I have an exhaust fan, I might call it EF1. Ooh, what's going on? Ah, it's because I tried to enter into a box that I'm not supposed to enter into. Okay, so EF1 is our first equipment facility ID, all right? Let's say that we have another one as well, another exhaust fan, EF2. And then let's just say boiler 1, B1. Okay. Now, if you have access to this equipment information at your building, you might have this in an equipment list, maybe from a maintenance contract that you've previously written, maybe from your drawings if you have a good set of drawings at your disposal, or maybe you just simply walked around your building and wrote down information on each piece of equipment from the nameplate data. So in any case, you will want to include one equipment facility ID for each piece of equipment. So the next column here is equipment type. I'm going to hover my mouse here. You can see the note popping up, which tells you what some of these acronyms mean. Now, after you click this, you can't just enter whatever you want. You are constrained by this list of 33 different unique equipment types plus the other category here at the bottom. So the idea is you go through this and you select the equipment type that applies to the equipment that you named in the previous column. So what you do enter here does matter and it will impact other tabs. The next tab is going to automatically update and respond to what you entered into this column. So once you start logging maintenance activities, you can't change the equipment type after you've created your first entry. So please bear that in mind. Because we haven't done anything yet, we can feel free to say, oh, I didn't mean that, I meant this one. But for this example, we know that this is a fan. We know the second one is not an air handler. This is a fan. And this third one is, let's say that it's a steam boiler. Okay. And that is how you're supposed to interact with the equipment type. More on that later when we get to the standard task tab. Now, the next column is equipment service type. So I'm going to, this is a dependent drop-down menu. So your options here are dependent upon what equipment type you entered in the previous column. So, you won't be able to enter this until you filled out the equipment type. For this example, we'll say, okay, this is an exhaust fan, and this is an exhaust fan, and this is a steam boiler. Let's just say, you know what? Let's say that it's a combination boiler. This is one of those steam boilers with an immersed coil for both your heating loop and your domestic hot water for the building. So just as an example. Now the next column is... and before I proceed, the equipment service type, I do want to point out that what you pick here doesn't have any downstream effects on the spreadsheet. So if I picked supply fan, for instance, that isn't going to change the list of inspection and maintenance activities. None of these selections in this equipment service type column have that effect. This is really just a column which helps you to categorize your O&M activities by equipment type. So this is really more for when you're reviewing your data and doing summary reports. That is the intent behind what this column is used for. This column is not critical in the sense that it doesn't, it will not affect the prescriptive standard tasks on following tabs. So if you are unsure what this is, every type has this, this drop-down choice right here, other. So if you're unsure, if you need to confirm what type of fan this is later, just pick the other category because it doesn't affect the other tabs. Okay. Next column is equipment year installed, and this has to be formatted in, in a year format. So we did restrict your inputs here. So this is a drop down. You can feel free to just punch in a number, like 2010, for instance. But if you use a different format, let's say you messed up and you did this instead, you typed a letter instead of a number, Excel is going to prevent you from doing this. The reason for this is because this needs to be a numerical input, which is going to, further to the right on this tab, there are expected useful life alerts that respond to this. In addition, this equipment year installed does make up part of the equipment unique ID, which I'm going to be showing you quite soon. So this equipment year installed is important. It is important that you gather this information and fill it out properly. Okay, now the next column is the equipment status. Let me just go ahead and, 2010. Let's just say all three of these are 2010, just for ease here. Okay, so the equipment status is next, and when we come to this column, we have another drop-down. Now, your options here are in service, out of service, abandoned in place, removed from site, and other. For the most part, when you are setting this up for the first time, you're going to be using in service for everything that you enter. Now, the point of this column is, let's say that in the future, maybe you do an expansion to your building, maybe you install a new piece of equipment, maybe a piece of equipment is defunct, not performing as it should, and it's rendered redundant or abandoned in place through some course of action that you've taken at the building. The intent here is we don't want you to be deleting that piece of equipment from the inventory when we have maintenance records associated with it. What we want you to do is to interact with this column, the equipment status column, change the status to something other than in service. So let's say out of service or abandoned in place. And now when you do this, now you can't see this, but up above here we have this plus sign. This plus sign indicates that there are hidden columns to the left of this. I'm going to go ahead and click on this so that you can see this. Now we can see here that when I entered abandoned in place, we are prompted to enter the equipment status details and the equipment year removed from service right here. So again, the year removed from service, let's just say that this steam boiler was abandoned in place because the owner went through and did a heating plant upgrade. Now there's a new hot water boiler with its own distribution system with other equipment. The idea here is, well, we did have a maintenance record of this boiler from 2010 to, let's say that it was removed in 2024, for instance. So we say, okay, it was installed in 2010 and it was removed from service in 2024. And now we would explain this. So we would say new hot water boiler plant installed in 2024. So the old steam boiler has no use, for instance. The idea is that you add the details here, which explains why the equipment status is not in service. Okay. So that's the status. And what's next here? So I'm going to go ahead and change this back to in service for now. Then we'll clear this out. And let's hide this again, just because this is an example, setting this up for the first time. And I'm going to go to the right here and show you the additional columns here. And before we proceed, let me show you, let's say, if I try to enter something a second time, like EF1 here, well, now we get this red alert, which says what this is telling you is something went wrong. You're not supposed to do what you just did. So we have broken one of the rules on this sheet by doing this, which is having no completely duplicative equipment facility IDs. So this is really just a reminder to you as the user of the spreadsheet that when you install a piece of equipment, you might refer to it as EF1, but the old piece of equipment, let's say that this was removed from service at some point. We just same situation as last time. I do want you to bear in mind it is okay to update the equipment facility ID name. You just can't delete the row entirely. So in this example, if I had an exhaust fan and it was installed in 2010 and it was replaced by another fan, which we call EF1 in 2024, I might then go ahead and rename this. So I might say, okay, this is removed underscore EF1. I might say old, something like this. And now we have not broken the no duplicative facility ID rule. So what's next? We can change this. We covered deleting. Now, yeah, if you did delete a row, it's not going to completely wreck the entire spreadsheet, but it is going to mess up a lot of the connections between the equipment and the task. So you'll see that as we proceed here. But on the following tab, you're going to be entering maintenance tasks. And if you just all willy-nilly deleted an entire piece of equipment, a lot of the data is going to get shifted and then will no longer correspond. So I do recommend that when you are making major edits to what's included in this list, just save a copy of the spreadsheet beforehand so that if any issues come up, you can always go back and fix any errors that came about as a result of adding new things. Okay, so, and by the way, this is how the spreadsheet is designed to work. We do want you to be updating the status to out of service when it's no longer in service and not delete it, keep everything in the repository here, and then proceed with new equipment. Okay, so let me go back. I'm going to just simplify this back to our original example, which is we simply have 2 exhaust fans and 1 boiler. Okay, so we have additional fields here to the right. I'll come back to these in a minute. Let me first show you the way. So we have these 3 equipments. I'm going to show you what this does on the HVAC Standard Tasks tab next. Okay, so on the HVAC Standard Tasks, all of these maintenance tasks just appeared in front of us. Previously, this was a blank sheet. Now, they appeared because this tab is going to give you a list of minimum required maintenance tasks for each piece of equipment, provided that you selected one of the 33 unique equipment types in our drop-down menu for equipment type. So we selected fan for the first 2, so that means that this tab is going to show all of the minimum required maintenance tasks here for EF1, and then again, all of the same maintenance tasks for EF2. So we can see that here. EF1, looks like we have a list of, 21 potential maintenance tasks, which includes air distribution, the fan itself, control systems. And then right here, starting on this row right here, we have EF2, and it's just the same tasks repeated for itself for EF2. Now, let's look at this first column right here, equipment unique ID. Now, what you see here, you can see this string of text, WSCB underscore EF1 underscore 2010. Now, this equipment unique ID column is a composite ID, which uses the building short name from the building information tab, and then the data that you entered on the HVAC inventory, including the facility ID and the year installed. And those 3 pieces of data are used together to create a unique identifier for that equipment. And then you can tie the maintenance task to that unique identifier. So remember from our example, this WSCB, this is the acronym that I gave to our example, the Washington State Capitol Building, WSCB. Then EF1 is just our fan name, which, from the previous tab, exhaust fan 1. And remember, it was installed in 2010, so this is what this equipment unique identifier means. WSCB, EF1, 2010, all three together. Now, if you're wondering where these tasks come from, this inspection task, inspect grills, blah, 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 all of these things listed here, all of these come from ASHRAE Standard 180 2018, which covers the standard practice for inspection and maintenance of commercial building HVAC systems. So when you select the equipment type for a defined equipment, Excel is simply returning the list that applies to that equipment type and displaying it here. Now, each one of these rows, as you can see, is an inspection and maintenance task. So let's go through each of these columns. So the inspection task is a description of the initial inspection task that may lead to corrective action later. For instance, this first task says that we need to inspect all grills, registers, and diffusers for dirt accumulation. The maintenance task is the labor task associated with addressing any issues that may have been identified during the inspection task. Recommended corrective action is the action that must be taken by the responsible party to rectify an issue that was identified. Okay, moving on. Typical condition indicators. So let's look over and above here because we have two columns here. We have the typical condition indicators. These are automatically generated based on the task in the standard list here, but then we have this condition indicator specific to on-site conditions. This is where you're supposed to add detail for your specific piece of equipment in your system, scenario, spaces served, etc. So let's read above here. Now, a condition indicator, as indicated by this note here, is an indicator of unacceptable system and equipment conditions shall be established. Let me start again. Condition indicators are indicators of unacceptable system and equipment conditions shall be established. These indicators are measurements or observations of conditions that could lead to failure or performance degradation. So these are typical condition indicators right here in column N. However, it's up to you to add any additional condition indicators that may apply to your specific case. This is a yellow optional data field, so it's not required that you fill this out, but it is recommended as a best practice. Okay, the next column is frequency. Now, this is going to be how often the inspection task is performed. You will notice that this is already filled in, but it is red. Now, red normally means it's a required input. It's a signal to you, the user, that you're supposed to enter something. So why is this column red when it's already pre-filled with the standard frequencies from ASHRAE 180? The reason for this is because this is a signal to you. The frequency is not set in stone. If the inspection frequency is too often as a result of one thing or another, you can update the frequency to less often. Or maybe it needs to be more often because of one reason or another, and you can update the frequency to more often than the default. What you enter here does matter because the Excel file is going to take this frequency and tell you what the next scheduled maintenance task date is. If you're using this to follow the Washington State Clean Building Performance Standard, Normative Annex L has additional guidance on updating the frequency. So this is what, I'm just going to read to you what Normative Annex L says in the Washington State Clean Building Performance Standard. If unacceptable condition indicators or unacceptable performance is found during 2 consecutive inspections, the owner or owner's designated representative shall investigate and analyze possible causes. If acceptable condition indicators or acceptable performance are found during 3 successive inspections, the inspection frequency for that task may be reduced from the existing frequency. The reduced frequency shall be based on the specific findings and shall be documented. Frequency may be adjusted for climate-related or operational reasons. Each adjusted frequency shall be documented, including the reason for the adjustment. Okay, now the next column is next scheduled task date. This, again, is going to be based upon the frequency. Right now, all of these, everything that you see here is January 1, 1990. This is because we simply have not entered any data yet. So we'll come back to this and I'll show you what this looks like when we start filling this in with data. So we'll circle back to this in a little bit. Oh, and please note, this note here says if you get this result 1/1/1990, you need to enter a date into task date records starting on column AD, which is further to the right, so we will come back to this. Okay, next, let's talk about party responsible for performing this task. So when I go here, it is a drop-down menu, and when I click this, these are the options that you entered into the contact information tab. So let's say that the in-house maintenance here is the responsible party for checking dirt on diffusers and grill. So let me just select that right here. Let's say that they've got these first two tasks because they are in the building and can perform that themselves. However, let's say that maybe the an outside contractor is Maintenance Incorporated is the responsible party for some of these more technical and equipment and controls based tasks. Let's just do it for the rest of them. Sure. All of these are going to be done by Maintenance Incorporated, whereas the party responsible for the first three will be our in-house staff, just for our example. So next is the authorizing party. Now, the authorizing party is going to be the party responsible for the financial authorization of maintenance and repair tasks. So in other words, ask yourself who needs to approve this from a financial and administrative perspective in order to ensure that this task is being performed. A lot of the times this is going to be the building owner or the facility manager, or sometimes even a tenant in a leased space who bears the responsibility for maintenance for the equipment that is in question. So I'm just going to go ahead and say that it's Facility Management Incorporated for all of them. I did misspell this on the other tab, but that's another issue. And we'll just go with this for our example. So next is performance objectives. So when we come here, let's make sure that we read this note above here. So performance objectives shall incorporate thermal and visual comfort, energy efficiency, and indoor environmental quality metrics. Performance objectives shall be based on design intent and operational criteria specific to a particular system. So in other words, performance objectives are always specific to your particular equipment, systems, and needs. And the idea is that the designer of the system or spaces served could describe a performance objective related to each task. But be warned, filling this performance objective column out may require you to just have to think a little bit about how the maintenance task affects your facility and other things related to that equipment or system. So when I come to this column, I always like to just ask myself the question, if I really neglect doing this maintenance task, what's going to happen? So, and when I answer that question, I try to include in my answer some numerical technical indicator. So writing the performance objective is going to be technical and can be challenging in some cases. If you're struggling to write the performance objective, you should go to the party responsible and ask them, what's going to happen if we neglect this maintenance task? In what ways, another way to ask this is, in what ways will thermal and visual comfort, energy efficiency, or indoor environmental quality be affected? And another thing, your facility staff can use their experience operating the building and observations to inform this. So, maybe they have handheld, like one of those handheld CO2 meters that they can walk around with, and they know from their experience walking in their building, measuring the CO2, that a particular space is normally at 500 parts per million. So one example performance objective here, and maybe this isn't the best example for this particular example, but let's go with this anyways. We might say something to the effect of, let's say that this serves a lobby. Lobby CO2 parts per million is, or should remain under, let's say, 700 ppm during fan operation. This is just one example, and you can see here this 700 part per million. That's the numerical technical indicator. So what this implies is that if the CO2 levels are above 700 parts per million, it's probably, related to the inspection task not being adequately maintained. Let's say that, this is a fan, and really this is about dirt accumulation. So maybe we can talk about pressure drops. Maybe we have a pressure gauge on your ductwork. We can keep this. We can keep that for later. Maybe we can say the magnahelic. I don't know if this is how you spell it. Magnahelic pressure gauge, if it's greater than 0.15 inches water column, that would be our performance indicator. Or magnahelic pressure gauge, let's say, should be less than 0.15 inches water column. And like this would, in our example, this would correspond to a real pressure gauge that you can physically go up to and read, so that it is an indicator of the performance of the system. So these are just a couple of examples. There are many more. If this was, let's say, a chiller system, the most classic example that I can think of, because I have a mechanical engineering background, is when you design a chiller plant system, you will know what the flow rate is. So a good performance objective, let's just say that this was a chiller, we would say the chilled water supply temperature should be 45 degrees Fahrenheit with a total flow rate of 1000 GPM. Now, this is an example, but the idea here is I would be able to write this if I had the set of design drawings which shows the design chilled water supply temperature set point, and we also know what the flow rate in the system is from those same design drawings. So this is just a few examples of how to fill out the performance objectives, just to give you an idea. Now, the performance objectives, filling this out is going to really benefit you in the long run, because this puts into context not only for the managers of the O&M program, but it even helps the maintainers as they understand the impact that performing the task or not performing the task might have on other things. Okay, so that's performance objective. Whenever you the performance objective source is, you're just supposed to document where you got this from. So some of these might be from design drawings, like this one, for instance, design drawings, or a specification like that. However, it is also acceptable, and it's okay to just simply cite your current facility requirements. If you don't have drawings or a spec stating what the performance objective is. If it's more from experience operating the building, I would just say something like the sources are requirements as a facility. Okay, so that's performance objectives. Let's move on. Now, this is the real meat and potatoes of this spreadsheet, these next three columns where it says task date task status and task comments for record number 001 in this case. So these three columns are where you actually start logging your maintenance activity. So you'll notice how these three columns are grouped together. We have a border here. It's more obvious when you start filling out information, but we do have different the border thickness is thicker between these to help you visually distinguish between the tasks and their dates. So let's just start here. Each time the maintainer attempts to perform an inspection maintenance activity, you're supposed to fill in all three of these columns, and including what date they attempted to inspect or perform the maintenance on the equipment. So, let's just go with an example here and say, okay, we performed this for the first time, this inspect grills, registers, and diffusers on, let's say, January 1st, 2025. And please note this column, this task date record, this does have to be a date as Microsoft Excel can read it, so you can't just, you can't just enter something like this, because that's not an acceptable format according to Excel. You have to enter it into this. It's ultimately just a number, but it gets converted into something which appears to be the date via the formatting of Excel. So this column, you just have to make sure that if you get this error right here, it means that you're supposed to make sure that you entered a date rather than whatever you just tried to enter. Okay, moving on. So let's say, okay, 1/1/25 was our first time that we inspected the grills, registers, and diffusers. Let's say that we completed it. We'll come back to that in a second. Now here in task comments, I do highly encourage you to, even when you say we completed it, don't just leave this blank, because if you leave this blank later down the road, you're going to come back and say, well, we said that we completed it, but no one wrote anything about it. So later down the road, you might be questioning, hey, did we actually complete that, or did we just fill in the box and check the box saying that it's complete? So I do encourage you, even when it's seemingly simple and straightforward, just write something unique here which signifies to you that you actually did it. So, for instance, I might say, okay, this is inspect grills, registers, and diffusers. I might say, okay, Bob Boiler, you don't have to say their name, but like, the maintainer, the party responsible, checked grills in rooms 101, 105, 110. All were clean. Now, when you write this, it's now very obvious, hey, someone actually went to those specific spaces and checked those specific things associated with this task. So I do encourage that. Now, let's come back to this status record. Now, I skipped over this, but we have these other options here. So we have complete work needed, incomplete work needed, and exemption. So the idea is, if you said complete, it means that the inspection and maintenance activity was completed and there is no further action required. Now, if you select complete work needed, this indicates that the inspection and maintenance activity was completed, but there needs to be work performed later to fully resolve any issues that were identified. Incomplete, which is the next option, this means that the maintainer attempted to perform the inspection and maintenance activity, but they were unable to complete the work. And incomplete needs work is the same, but on top of being unable to complete the work, additional work is identified as a potential corrective action. So, that scenario is really for maybe the maintainer was unable to perform that task, but they're proactive enough and insightful enough to notice things that would prevent them from satisfactorily satisfying that task. So that's really what incomplete work needed is for. And lastly, let's have exemption. So when you say exemption, it means that the maintainer did not attempt to complete the inspection and maintenance task. So this most often comes up when something is preventing them from doing so, whether it be accessibility, maybe it's failure of another critical system, which the sub-equipment depends on. For just for instance, let's say this is a VAV box, but the air handling unit providing airflow to the system, there's a critical failure on the motor. Well, when there's no airflow, you're limited in what you can check. So that would be a good example of when you might say, okay, VAV box 101, we have to say exemption. So when you say exemption, get ahead of myself here. We already covered that. Bear with me just 1 second while I find my place here. Okay. The exemption, when you select exemption, if you're doing this for Washington State Clean Building Performance Standard, you are then required to explain yourself. So before I said, okay, it's a good practice to always list a comment even when it's complete. If you are doing this in the state of Washington for the Clean Building Performance Standard and you say exemption, it is a requirement at that point to state what the reason was. So in our example, we might say air handler 1 was down for maintenance, no airflow, VAV box cannot be tested, for instance. Just imagine for a minute that this task was related to a VAV box, not a fan, just so I can show you this example. Let's see here. So you see the idea here. You enter this task date, and then the idea here is, well, let's see, what's the frequency on this? Semi-annually. So if we did this and actually I just skipped over it. If we did this on January 1st, 2025, the next scheduled date to perform this task is then July 2nd, 2025 here. So we would say, okay, the intent here is that this next record is going to be, whatever that scheduled record was. Okay. Okay. And now that I've entered 2 records in here, and you saw before that we had before I entered that second record, the 7-2, the next scheduled task date was showing me 7-2. But now that I've entered, the second task being January 2nd, now we have another scheduled task date for the end of the year. So hopefully you see how this works and how the date here works with the frequency here to tell you what the next scheduled task date is. Okay. So when you fill this out with a bunch of real data, this column here, this next scheduled task date, does wind up being very useful. Now, currently we only have 1 entry that shows this in a useful format, but let me just show you. I do like using this filter function here on this column, the next scheduled task date, to help with planning for the next actions that are supposed to take place for the equipment that's listed here. So I do recommend the filtering function for this column. Let me just reselect everything so we can see everything again. Okay. So, and how that's useful, if you then go ahead and use the filter function to show the dates that you care about, you can then use that as a way to print perhaps a work order list by responsible party. You can also, use these filters. Maybe we're like, well, I only want to show what Bob's responsible for. I don't really care about Mary at this moment. Mary maintainer from the external contractor that does the HVAC from our contact information tab. And now we can, in combination with that, show certain dates, for instance, here, just as an example. So let me go ahead and reselect everything so no rows are hidden again. And let's proceed. So at this point, you should understand how to add maintenance records like we are showing here. And so yeah, let's, and by the way, the rest of all these columns are simply more places to put maintenance data. This goes all the way out to 80 records. So if you do have quarterly tasks, you will have enough space in this spreadsheet for approximately 20 years of maintenance and inspection task records. Beyond that, I would actually recommend either expanding the columns yourself or simply creating a new spreadsheet with, data going beyond that if the piece of equipment lasts longer than that. So at this point, you should understand how to add records. And now I want to go back to this yellow column that we skipped over here, this not applicable filter. You probably noticed this, but we didn't talk about it until now. So we understand that sometimes maintenance tasks that are listed here won't apply because of the nature of the task or the equipment or its application in your specific building. So for instance, let's say that instead of this being like a rooftop exhaust fan connected to ductwork, maybe this is simply an axial fan mounted to, an axial wall-mounted exhaust fan that's located in a mechanical room. I'm imagining a boiler room with one of those exhaust fans that's just has no ductwork. So in that example, this task, inspect grills, registers, diffusers for dirt accumulation, this task applies to fans that are connected to air distribution systems. You can see here this O&M type column tells you what type of task it is. So EF1, we have air distribution system tasks. We have the tasks associated with the fan itself. And then we also have control systems as well. So, for your specific fan, your specific EF1, you might say, well, a lot of these don't apply. Let's just go with this example of, axial exhaust fan in the boiler room. So we might come to this first task and say, hey, you know what? I don't actually have any grills to inspect. So this task doesn't really make sense to appear in our list. So if that's the case, that is what this column here, not applicable filter, is for. When you enter anything here other than a blank, blank nothingness, it's going to change the formatting of this. So I'm going to just enter the letter A for real quick just to show you what happens. Now you can see that a bunch of this data turned to, black background with like really gray text. You can still faintly make out what's said here, but the implication is that it's black because it does not apply. Now I entered the letter A. Typically I entered the letter X. It doesn't really matter, but that's just what I usually do. You can enter any string into this column and it will work as designed. So when it turns black, the intent is that task doesn't apply for this equipment, right? So you can go through and say, okay, that doesn't apply, that one doesn't apply. Maybe this one does, but maybe this one doesn't. Like this is a variable frequency drive. Maybe there is no drive on the fan, for instance. So the idea here is that once you have your equipment inventory set up, you're supposed to go through and, on this standard task tab, it might take a little time to set up the first time, but once it's set up, it's going to be a lot easier to use in the future. So the idea is go through and say for each task, okay, does this apply? Do I actually want this to be something that we do, or is this kind of superfluous and not necessary for that fan? And you go through, use this not applicable filter, remove all of the tasks like this. Don't delete. The spreadsheet won't even let you delete. I think about, it doesn't let me select delete because there are formatting restrictions here. But like, you are supposed to be filtering things out and removing them from list without deleting the row entirely. That is the way the spreadsheet was designed. So whenever you add a new piece of equipment, I recommend going through the items and putting an X in this column for any task which does not apply. And then from there we can see, okay, every row that's not black is a row that we're supposed to act on via this frequency listed. So if you want to make the list easier to read, you can filter, you can use this filter function here to remove things like this. Check this out. So you come here to not applicable filter, you click on the auto filter drop down here, you remove all of the entries that you put here. So for in our case, I just use the letter X for all of them. And now look, ta-da, now there's no rows that we deem to be not applicable shown here. That's the quickest way to clean up the look of this spreadsheet. I'm going to go ahead and unfilter this because I want to show you next how this interacts with the filtering questions. So I'm going to go ahead and jump back to the HVAC Inventory tab and show you something that interacts with this. And let me go ahead and delete these X's because I just want to... Okay, so we don't have any rows hidden right now. Good, good, good. Okay, I'm going to hide these rows because it's not relevant to my example here, just so we can see more rows per tab. And now let me jump back here to the HVAC inventory. And we stopped after this column over here. I'm going to hide the... Let's change this back to in service. Uh-oh. Okay, it's working. Okay, in service. And let me hide this. Okay. Now, we skipped over this before, but every piece of equipment that's listed here, when you select it, you will see in this column, filtering question 1, you'll see a question pop up. So this question here is, does the fan use a variable frequency drive? So for our example here, let's go ahead and say, no, there is no variable frequency drive for exhaust fan 1. Maybe there is one for exhaust fan 2, for instance. You can see on the next row, which is not a fan, this is the boiler. This is an entirely different question. These filter questions respond to the equipment type that you entered here. So every time that you say fan, you're going to have the same filtering question listed here. I do also want to point out right here, this group plus sign right above here, this means that we have hidden columns. And be advised, we have lots of potential filtering questions for pieces of equipment. Now, our example right now, it only includes fans. So look here, we have filtering question 1, does the fan use variable frequency drive? We have filtering question 2, do you want to include O&M tasks for the air distribution systems? And then after that, we don't have any other applicable questions. So the idea here is that, you know, there's no reason to respond to any of the questions after any of the real questions. If it says not applicable, just leave that cell blank. So let me go ahead and just answer a couple of these. So does the fan use the variable frequency drive? I said no to this EF1. I'm going to say, let's now revert back to our original example. This is once again an exhaust fan, which does serve ductwork. I'm going to say yes to both of these. I'll just answer these as well for the steam boiler. Does the boiler burn fuel oil? Let's say yes, sure. Does the boiler burn natural gas? Let's say no. Okay. So these filter questions, these are yellow optional fields. It is absolutely fine if you do not notice these and do not fill them out. Everything in the spreadsheet will still work. What this does do, if you do choose to fill out the filtering questions, is now when you respond to the question, now it's going to automatically remove things. Look, we don't have an X here, but we said, if you remember, we said no, EF1 does not have a variable frequency drive. So what this did was it looked up the variable frequency drive task, and it effectively it kind of entered an X into this column. Now I'm going to show you, this is a little bit under the hood of the Excel, but I'm showing you a few hidden columns here that helps make this the blackened rows happen. Now, when we entered yes, or sorry, when we entered no to this filtering question here, does the fan use a variable frequency drive? It placed an X right here, and it did so by, looking up EF1 in the HVAC inventory and returning this value for this row because it's the variable frequency drive row. There's an entire back end to this that I'm not showing, but there are hidden tabs here which make this possible. So if you go through, like let's say you set this up and you answered all of the filtering questions correctly, I'm going to go ahead and change one of these answers, by the way. Let's change EF1 to saying, you know what, this does not have an air distribution system. So let's change this. Now look, if you remember, these rows were not blacked out, but now they are. That is because it responded to that filtering question. If we again go back, change this back, my mouse is responding oddly for some reason. Bear with me. Okay. Okay, when we change it back, those 3 rows then go back to normal formatting, as you can see here. So these filtering questions are really just assistance to you when you're setting up the tab for the first time. So, let's just go with this example for now. We are including, we're saying, okay, there is no VFD for EF1. There is one for EF2. So we will see here, okay, EF1, the variable frequency drive operation, is blacked out. I'm just going to do this, find it easier than that. Okay, so we have EF1, see here, WSP EF1 2020. We also see it here, EF1. And then this next row, which is actually deceptively 20 rows down, is EF2. It's 20 rows down because we're using the filtering function here. But you can see that because we said that there is a variable frequency drive, it did not then exclude this task. So that's all of the filtering questions. Now, we only show 2, and then in the case of the boiler, we have this, number 3 here. But some of these, let me just add one more piece of equipment here. AHU1, for instance. AHU, this is an air handling unit, okay. Supply air, let's say that this is 2010. This is also in service. Now, please note, I chose air handling unit because we actually do have 10 questions here. So let's say, does it use an airside economizer? I'm just going to say no to illustrate this point. Does the supply fan use a variable frequency drive? Let's say, again, no. So that will filter out some things. What type of cooling coil is used? Let's say it's a chilled water coil. What type of heating coil is used? Natural gas, sure. Energy recovery system. Let's say that there is none. That's actually going to exclude some heat recovery tasks. Is there an ultraviolet lamp for the mold growth mitigation? Let's say no, because then that'll filter out something for the UV lamp. Humidification system. Let's say no. Include O&M tasks for air distribution systems. Let's say no. I'm going through and trying to exclude as much as I can here in this example. Does the air handler use pneumatic control components? Let's say no to that. Does it use direct digital components? Let's say yes to that. So you can see that's a lot of questions, right? That was 10. That is the most number of questions out of any piece of equipment in this spreadsheet. That applies to air handler 1, it applies to rooftop units, and other equipment have several questions as well. But the air handling unit and rooftop units are the ones that come to my mind because I just know that there's lots and lots of potential tasks which have filtering questions associated with them. So back to the standard task tab. And again, let me unfilter this so we can see that newly created air handling unit underneath the boiler over here, okay? And we can see, look, we have a bunch of removed rows. Look, the variable frequency drive doesn't apply. Look, the ultraviolet lamp doesn't apply. The What's next? Compressed air operation. That's because we said that there's no pneumatics. What's next? These are dehumidification and humidification systems, as well as airside economizer functionality. And we have heat recovery tasks, because we said we have no heat recovery wheel, it's removing all of these. And you can see, look, we have a lot of potential tasks, but our specific air handling unit does not include those tasks. So that's why so many of these are black. So let's say that I went through and I answered the filtering questions, and I also, as a good, as a good first step, when I set up this spreadsheet, I went through and I manually removed a few of these tasks. Let's just pick a few randomly here. This one, this one, this one. Okay. So now we have a whole bunch of tasks in our list that are not applicable. And, our example before, I showed you how to do this using this column. I actually really like unhiding this set of columns right here and then doing the same thing right here. So if you do not applicable filter calculated, this includes both the ones that you manually removed yourself in addition to the ones that are automatically removed via the filtering question. So when I select OK here, look, now we don't have a single row in this whole sheet that's not applicable because we've used the filters appropriately. So that is the way that I like to go about cleaning up the spreadsheet and making it more easy to use from a user's perspective after you've set it up for the first time. Okay. So that's filtering questions. And, just to reiterate, all they do is help you to eliminate tasks from the list that are not relevant. Okay, so let's add a few more pieces of equipment. Just for example here, we added an air handling unit. Let's add a chiller. Let's add a chilled water pump. How about a VAV box 101, VAV 102, VAV 103. Oops. Maybe I've got a unit heater. Unit heater 1. Okay. And again, this equipment type column, very important. We do have to select the right equipment type to pull the required tasks. Okay, so we have a chiller vapor compression. This one is a pump. This is the chilled water pump. VAV box, where is that? VAV box. All right. And then unit heater, where is that? Unit ventilator, no. Split unit, steam. Okay, steam or hot water unit heater. Or okay, furnace or combustion unit heater or steam or hot water unit heater. Let's say that it's a steam unit heater. All right, just choosing our options here. Okay, and again, equipment service type doesn't have any direct implications on the spreadsheet itself. It's just for organizational and summarizing your data. So yeah, we said a steam unit heater, and let's say that they were installed all in the same year. And now this. Now, obviously we didn't fill out it. I'm going to leave these blank for now, but we saw how it responds. Hopefully you realize how entering an answer to the filtering question is going to interact with the HVAC standard task tab and black out rows that are not applicable. So let's just so now that we have this is looking more like a real building with a bunch of different equipment in our maintenance program. So we'll just proceed with this example. Let's see. Okay, so we can see now that a bunch of these new equipments got added. We've got the new chiller 1, we got the chilled water pump, we got the VAV boxes, we got the unit heater, etc. The last thing I want to point out is if you do have so much equipment in your inventory, we've got almost 300 tasks in this spreadsheet right now. Now this spreadsheet does have a limit. You can only have 1,000 tasks in here. the reason for this limit, honestly, is the limitations of Excel. When we tried having a lot more than this, and the spreadsheet was lagging a lot of the time and was slow, so we made the decision, let's go a little lighter weight and have a restriction on the number of tasks. Back on the instructions tab, I want to direct your attention to this note here at the bottom. In the event that you need more than 1,000 tasks, what I recommend to you is breaking this up, create a copy of your spreadsheet, and let's say only list equipment of certain types that adds up to less than 1,000. And then in the other spreadsheet, maybe you have, I don't know, 10 or 12 air handling units that all, because an air handling unit has a lot of tasks, it might suck up all or close to 1,000 of the standard task tab. So then you would have a spreadsheet that's just for the air handlers and then a spreadsheet just for the other stuff. So that is how I would recommend filling this out to stay under the the limitation that we have as a result of this being in Excel. Okay, so let me go back here and let's go through this HVAC inventory in a little bit more detail. I'm going to go ahead and let's hide the filtering questions because you saw how those work. Okay, and now I'm now going to unhide the hidden optional inputs here as well. So we have here in the inventory tab, equipment output capacity and its units, input capacity and their units. And this is the reason why I really added a lot of these equipment, was I just wanted to show you how to fill this out. And bear in mind, this is all optional. This isn't going to affect the standard task tab or others, but I'm just going to illustrate how I would go about filling this out. So capacity, output capacity, refers to the equipment and what it's capable of delivering. For a fan, a lot of the times you will know the output capacity in terms of CFM. So let's say that this first fan is 1,000 CFM, the second one is 1,500. This is how you're supposed to enter this, okay? You say, okay, the capacity column is a number, the units column is the acronym of the unit. So for the fan, it's CFM. For the boiler, let's say this is a 300 MBH output boiler. Okay, air handler 1, again, we have, let's just say that the 10,000 CFM unit. Okay. Chiller, most common is tons. Whoops. Okay. Pump, GPM. Now, and bear in mind, it doesn't always have to be CFM like I'm mentioning here. If you know like the motor horsepower, that could also be useful to track. So normally I would just say, okay, this is 300 GPM. However, if you don't know the GPM, you could just say, okay, this is a 20 horsepower unit. Between that. 20 horsepower, okay. VAV box, again, these are typically CFM values. All right, unit heater, often it'll be like an MBH. Okay, let's just say 30 MBH. Whoops, I did it wrong. Okay, 30 MBH, because you're supposed to enter a number in this column and then the units for that column here, okay? So the input capacity is related to the output, and very simply, the input is supposed to be the output divided by the efficiency. So just to make the math easy here, I'm only going to fill this in for the boiler. Let me just go ahead and say that the input is 400 MBH and the output is 300. So that would correspond to 75% efficiency. So this is how you would enter that here. A lot of the times you will only know one or the other, output or input. Sometimes you'll have both, but that's not necessarily a given. If you go up to a motor, the listed nameplate is actually the output capacity. So if you walk up to the motor and it's 10 horsepower, that's 10 horsepower output, not input. Okay, next columns are, again, optional columns, but hopefully this location is pretty self-explanatory. We would say things like, just where is it located? Often it'll be in its own room. Let's say AHU mezzanine floor for this one. Chiller, let's say second floor roof. Okay. MER 201, that's a mechanical room acronym. VAV 101, we might say room 101. Okay. Room 102. Room 103. Oops. Okay. And unit heater 1, we might say garage or wherever it is. Okay. So this is how to fill out the equipment location. That's really just for your informational purposes. Similarly, this equipment comments and notes, just enter whatever you want. Some people like to say, oh, I like to track my, the filter sizes. This is a filter size. Okay. For an air handling unit, for instance. You can enter whatever you want there though, under equipment notes and comments. So, okay. What is this? Equipment has part and is fed by. Now, it's a little awkwardly worded, but the reason why this is here and is called has part and is fed by is because we wanted this inventory. We want you to be able to relate equipment to other equipment. So, for instance, this VAV 101, 102, and 103, these might be fed by air handler 1. It could be like air handler 1 is located on the mezzanine floor, and then the air gets provided to the air distribution system, and then the VAV boxes 1, 2, and 3 here are sub-equipment of that system. So we would then say, okay, it is fed by AHU1. Oops. AHU1, AHU1, and AHU1. Okay. So, and real quickly, let me just show you here. Now, the reason why it's called as part and is fed by is because there is an existing schema for relating equipment to one another, and that is called the BRIC schema, BRICK schema. So from their documentation, this is what BRIC is. These examples here, it just shows you, kind of what I showed you in the Excel, where you can have a relationship between the air handling unit and the sub-equipment that it's fed by. We only included has part and is fed by. There are other types of relationships, like has point relates to controls points on, within the BRIC schema. So just that this is the reason why it's listed as has part and is fed by. Now, this image, what I'm showing on screen right now, this is straight from the BRIC schema website. This is their example of how to use the relationships properly. So I'm just showing you this here because this was our original intended use, was that you, if you create the relationships using the BRIC schema, now you have a starting point for full-blown BRIC models down the road. So the BRIC schema, I'm just going to read to you what BRIC schema describes itself as from their documentation. So BRIC is an open source effort to standardize semantic descriptions of the physical, logical, and virtual assets in a building and the relationships between them. BRIC consists of an extensible dictionary in terms of terms and concepts in and around buildings, a set of relationships for linking and composing concepts together, and a flexible data model permitting seamless integration of BRIC with existing tools and databases. So we already explained this, but you can see visually here, okay, AHU1A feeds VAV 2-4, 2-3, similar to our example of AHU1 feeding VAV 101, 102, and 103. So this really is not a database tool, but you can use this as a place to get a starting point. But more importantly, this is a place where you can go and see, okay, if you're having issues with maintenance on air handler 1, for instance, or vice versa. Let's say that you're having issues with maintenance on VAV, like all of the VAVs combined, and then you see, oh, all of them are fed by the same air handling unit. Maybe we have another VAV box fed by another one, and those are not having issues. The idea here is that you can use this is fed by and has part to help summarize the data and analyze it. Okay. So, and real quickly, the has part, the idea here is that like if you have, like let's say the air handler 1 has, let's say it's an oddball air handling unit and there's multiple supply fans. The idea here, and maybe those are listed explicitly on your building management system, you might even say, okay, AHU1 has part supply fan 1 and supply fan 2, for instance. So it's the idea is that it's part of the equipment. Another good example is a VAV fan powered box. One of its has part relationships will be the motor, which is driving the fan on the fan powered box part. That's how the has part column works. Okay, so I think that's enough on Brick. If you want to learn more, I do encourage you to go to their website and read their ontology and documentation. That's brickschema.org, BRICK, schema, SCHEMA.org. Okay, so that is the HVAC inventory tab. I think we've covered just about everything. This equipment unique ID, this is, again, we explained this before, this is generated from those 3 composite ID data points, being the short name, the facility ID, and the year installed. Lastly, these last 2 columns over here, equipment EUL. The EUL stands for expected useful lifetime, and it's simply returning the expected useful lifetime of that equipment type for these first 2 rows are fans, for instance. So it's returning from a BOMA International. I have the complete citation here. Project Lifespan Estimates, BOMA International Preventive Maintenance Guidebook, Best Practices to Maintain Efficient and Sustainable Buildings. That's a guidebook which has a bunch of expected useful lifetime assumptions developed by BOMA International. That is what is used in this spreadsheet. So this 20 here is just 20 years responding to that spreadsheet. You can see, hey, look, this boiler has 25 years. That's a longer lifetime than fans, for instance. But oh, look, this chilled water pump only has 15. That's simply what's listed in the BOMA International reference guide. And we can see here, this past expected useful life notification. This column, all it simply does is it tells you when your equipment is older than its expected useful life as prescribed by this reference. So in this example, we said, okay, all of our equipment was installed in 2010. The only piece of equipment that is beyond its expected useful lifetime is this 15-year, because it's 2010 to 2025. Pump. So we are getting a notification here that this pump is past its expected useful lifetime. The reason why this is helpful to you is to help you plan for end-of-life replacements. Okay, so I think we pretty well covered the inventory. We did all of the columns here, and we also covered the entire function of the standard task tab, right? So what do we do if we have our own custom inspection and maintenance tasks that we want to create ourselves? So that is what this next tab is for, HVAC Custom Tasks. So this, when you come to this tab, right now it's blank. It's designed to let you enter whatever you want. However, it is configured so that you still need to assign each of the tasks to an equipment in the HVAC inventory. So the first thing that you do is you come here and you match the equipment type to whichever equipment that you've listed in the inventory. So our example here, let's just say, let's start with other, because that's in some ways a little more straightforward. Let's say, okay, it's an other piece of equipment, and look here, we have a drop-down menu and it's saying, oh, there's a calculation error. The reason for this is because we have not created an item in the HVAC Inventory tab which has the other equipment type. So there are instructions here, but you are required to create a unique facility identifier for everything that appears here so that it knows what it's corresponding to. So let's go ahead and create an other equipment category. And for this example, I'm going to be using the example of a riding lawnmower. Maybe you operate a facility that has extensive landscaping needs and you have a bunch of landscaping care equipment, and despite the fact that it's not HVAC, you still just want to list it in the same inventory. So let's go back and I'll show you how to do this. So okay, equipment facility ID, let's say, okay, riding lawnmower RLM, that's how I came up with this. Riding lawnmower A, that might be the name of our riding lawnmower, right? And look, we have to select other, okay? And we have to select when did we buy the riding lawnmower piece of equipment. Let's say it's a little newer, 2020. Okay, it's in service, it's other. Okay, now let's come back to the custom task tab. If you remember, we selected other before. This was returning a calculation error, but now look, now we can select the equipment unique ID. Look, RLMA, we just created that riding lawnmower A that we bought in 2020. Corresponding to Washington State Capitol building. So now this row, Excel knows that this row is supposed to correspond to that riding lawnmower. So here we can type whatever we want. And my advice to you is go back to your operation and maintenance handbook for the piece of equipment in question and simply just do what the manufacturer recommends. So we might say check oil and filter. Maintenance task, change filter. Not going to put too much thought into what we're actually typing here, but you get the idea that you can type whatever you want. Okay, frequency, how often are we doing this? I don't know. I don't really know lawnmowers that well, but let's say that this is a semi-annual. Okay, party responsible. And we can see all of this is working the same way that the other tabs work, right? Performance objectives. So I'm going to skip over this. I know I said to put some thought into this, but this is just showing you the example of how to fill this out. And then from here, this should look pretty familiar. This is just exactly like the standard task tab, and you can fill in your records here. So 1125, for instance. Complete, replaced filter, for instance. Okay, so that is how to go ahead and do it for a previously undefined piece of equipment. But please note, you can do this for other equipment as well. Let's say that, one of your exhaust fans, let's just go with exhaust fan 1. That was our very first example. This one time I was on the roof of this admin building, and they had birds and falcons up there, and they had issues with feathers getting in the intake of the fan. So maybe that's an example of like a very special consideration, right? So we're going to say inspect grill on roof for bird feathers. Obviously, this is a non-standard task, right? Remove feathers. Clean grill, right? All right. And now we have this exhaust fan has a special task here on the custom task tab, in addition to the standard tasks that are listed here on the standard task tab. Okay, so that is how to interact with this custom task tab and how to add things to it for both the equipment that you already have in your inventory, and also how to add new other category to have full control over it. Okay, what's next? We already covered the other category, setting up all the responsible parties, filling out everything. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward, right? So, and we covered how we're going back to the manufacturer's guidance to add any special tasks that may apply here. Okay. So that about covers all of the HVAC related interactions that you'll have with this Operation and Maintenance Program Development Tool. So before we move on to the Envelope tab, I am going to show you how I like to use the filter function to review the data and summarize the results. So for this next part, just to be clear, I'm going to be showing you how to do this, assuming you've entered several data points for multiple pieces of equipment. Granted, we have not done that here. I'm not going to waste too much time during this tutorial entering that. I have on my computer right now, I'm going to pull up an example. Okay, hopefully you should see another example here. And look, this is 123 Main Street. This is an entirely different spreadsheet that I filled out in advance just to show you this functionality. So when you and this is not going to be a complete tutorial on pivot tables, but pivot tables are my preferred visualization tool within Excel to create some summary charts and tables for your use. And I'm just going to show you how to do that here. So on the standard task tab, what you do is you have to highlight all of the required data that is potentially in your data range. So I'm just going to highlight this entire sheet here, okay? And then we're going to do, what was it again? Bear with me. It's the pivot table. Where is that? I think it's under data, isn't it? Bear with me just one moment, one moment. It's on the Insert tab. Of course. Okay. Pivot table. Here we go. Okay. From table range. Okay. And it's important that you include the header. Otherwise, this is not going to work. So let's just say OK. So now we have a blank pivot table. What are we going to add here? I am going to add next scheduled task to, let's start with, okay, let's do the equipment unique ID on rows. Okay, so this is going to show you each of the equipments. Let's do next scheduled task date. Okay. We do have to change the formatting of this. So value field settings, I'm going to do max to show us the most recent, although I think average will also work. And then the number format is date. Okay, so now we're displaying a date. And lastly, let's show, I want to do a filter as well. Let me show you. I want to do it by responsible party because that's how I think a lot of you may do this. So you drag this into party responsible, and right now we're showing all, okay? And here's the trick with Excel. You have to come here and do refresh. I have no idea why it displayed something other than that in the first place, but that's the trick with pivot tables is you right-click somewhere inside the pivot table and do refresh, and it will update everything. If you start editing things, you will see that it doesn't update right away until you hit refresh. And we can see here, this is just my example of about 20 pieces of equipment here, including fans and boilers, chillers. We've got some domestic hot water heaters, a couple air handlers, fan power boxes, etc. And here we are returning the next scheduled task date. So this is a useful tool that you might need as a manager of the operation and maintenance program to show what the next date that you need to act is. It's just one example, but you can see here, if you're familiar with pivot tables, you can do this with any of the columns that we included in the standard task tab. So let's see. This should give you an idea of the possibilities of summary reports based on what you enter in the tab, and you can really just go from there. There's a lot that you can do with this. I did this because sometimes you will only want to say, hey, only show me what this contractor is doing. So I selected Maintenance Incorporated, and look, we only have the boilers, domestic hot, and air handlers. If we do a different one, it'll be like, okay, that's Fred Fixit's list, and then all is all of them again. Okay, so that's enough on pivot tables. If you are interested in visualizing more, you have a lot of capabilities right here in Excel. All right, so that's it for that example. Let me close out of this. Okay. Now, finally, let's move on to the envelope tab. Okay, so the envelope has to do with airtightness, weather stripping, and sealing of the building shell, including windows, doors, and other air pathways. So by default, the tasks include on the envelope tab include the tasks included on the envelope tab include having the energy manager and or other qualified persons perform an inspection of the envelope, typically once every 3 years. Because this inspection happens less frequently than many of your HVAC tasks, the record-keeping process on this tab is simpler than the HVAC tasks. If you have any past issues that you want to retain, you are intended to list it here. So for this first example, check for sealing air leaks along exterior joints and around conduit penetrations. Maybe this is the in-house staff that can do this. The owner authorizes it, sure. Most recent date task record, we would say, okay, we just did this, let's say June 15th, 2025. Like this. Okay, issue description. And issue description is just where you list any issues that came as a result of it, and log of past issues is just where you log anything like that. Okay, so moving on, that's it for the envelope tab. Moving on to the lighting tab. The lighting tab includes 3 things. First, it's verifying that lighting controls are functioning as intended. This includes sensor or control operation, programming, and placement of sensors. Now, in order to do this, you must first make a list of each sensor or controller for lighting, location, area type, and control type. So let's say, I'm just going to make a few here. Lobby. Let's say that there's a daylight sensor here. Okay. All right, let's say a first floor bathroom. Occupancy sensor. And let's say a exterior wall pack, maybe. Exterior wall pack. Area type, exterior. Control type, let's say fixture mounted photocell. Okay. And the task for all these is the same, but bear in mind it's like it's a little bit broad. It concerns controls, the sensors, any time. We didn't have any timers, but show one here. Another exterior, I guess. Let's say parking lot. Cobreads. Sure, that's a timer. Okay, so we have a few examples here, and the task is to verify that the control is functioning as intended for that lighting system. And it's really the same as everything else here. Maybe we say, okay, this is, again, another in-house staff task. Oops. Authorizing party, we'll say owner. All right. Most recent date task record, of course, just enter, whenever it was last done, and then describe any issues that were identified. And then again, similarly to the envelope tab, you just log any previous issues that were related to that particular space. Okay, the second task on the lighting tab is, I'm gonna click this, we're gonna hide some of this, okay, so now it's easier to read. The next item is Luminaire Integrity, where this is really about the lighting power density. So the idea here is that if you have lighting floor plans, that's really the best document resource in order to fill out this particular section. So the way I like to do it is I like to have the floor plans in front of me. A lot of the time you will be able to pretty quickly determine what the input power wattage is for each space. But more importantly, you will be able to measure the square footage of each space from the floor plans, probably better than doing it in person, certainly. So again, let's just say, okay, lobby, area type lobby. Let's say that it's, I don't know, 500 watts and it's 5,000 square feet, okay? And then this comparison lighting power density, this is supposed to be from the design documents. So again, the lighting floor plans, your electrical drawing set is the best source for this. The the relevant energy conservation code, that isn't really what this column is for. However, you can use that as a reference as well. The idea is that you're supposed to list what the design documents say the lighting power density is. And the rule here, if you're doing this in the state of Washington for the Clean Building Performance Standard, is you don't want the lighting power density to go up over time unless you have a documented change in the space utilization. Okay, so let's just say, for example, I go to the design drawings and it's exactly what I entered here. It's 500 watts, 5,000 square feet, 0.1 lighting power density, right? Okay, and typically you'll do this every 3 years, and everything else is kind of the same. So in-house staff, facility management, date, sure, and then issue description, log of past issues. You see how to fill this out. I think I'm going to stop there on the LPD. Moving on, Luminaire Cleanliness. This is all about making sure that optical surfaces, lenses, reflectors, louvers, and shielding mechanisms and lamps are cleaned. So this list right here is automatically pulled from the Luminaire Integrity because it's like the idea is you entered this from the lighting floor plan, so you already have an inventory of sorts here. And you just go ahead and perform the tasks as described. Check for evidence of dirt and debris on these surfaces and clean them if necessary. So you do see how to do this, right? Authorizing party. Okay, good. Okay, and all three of these lighting tasks are recommended to take place every 3 years. Okay, and that's it for the lighting tab. We don't have anything below cleanliness. Those are the three things that we have to cover for lighting. Okay, so that is the last tab, and that essentially concludes this detailed tutorial. So once again, my name is Ben O'Donnell, and that concludes today's tutorial. Thank you so much.